There is no base for this. The only base for this is just people who are going to support Donald Trump no matter what Donald Trump does. But there is absolutely nobody who voted for Donald Trump because they wanted to see another war. Nobody believes, I mean, I shouldn't say, maybe there's some people, very few people.
On this episode of the Unfiltered Take, comedian and political commentator Dave Smith argues that a new war with Venezuela isn't a response to a real threat, it's a political choice. He breaks down why there's no voter appetite for another war, why the drug trafficking story is a pretext to how the military-industrial complex keeps finding new targets when everything else at home is falling apart. Listen in, and then I'll jump in with a couple of thoughts.
Don't recognize that the administration is lying through their teeth to us about this, and that this has absolutely nothing to do with concerns of drug trafficking into America. It is, Rob, I got to say, seeing as how close we are to actual military confrontation here, it's even worse than the war in Iran in terms of, like, they haven't even laid down a propaganda campaign. They haven't really convinced anyone that there is that it's even possible that Venezuela poses some type of threat to the United States of America. And obviously, when you look at the numbers, the drug stuff is all just a pretext for war. But here we are. I mean, I don't know what to say, Rob. I mean, I have a few things to say on this, but I'm curious to get your thoughts. But my overarching thought here is just, I mean, what a disaster this administration is. It just couldn't, it's like a cartoon at this point. That's what you pivot to now. Now, after the Epstein disaster, after the Iran disaster, after the Israel disaster, after Comey's case is thrown out, this is what you pivot to now? We're going to get into another war of choice because you're listening to Marco Rubio or something like that? It's just, it's pathetic.
Let me pause him right there. What you're hearing is frustration with how quickly Washington turns to foreign policy whenever things collapse at home. This isn't a response to a threat. It's not a reaction to an emergency. It's distraction politics, plain and simple. And the reason the public feels disconnected is because there's zero appetite for another conflict. No voters asked for this. No one even pretended to make a case for it. That's the gap between what everyday people want and what Washington does on autopilot.
Well, from what I understand, it was time for someone in America to finally put an end to the Cuban Missile Crisis. So if we're gonna exert proper pressure on Cuba, it's time for Venezuela to fall. And what's nice about having a war on this side of the hemisphere is that we can save on the shipping costs and spend more money on the bombs. So actually, we can reduce overall costs of wars while still giving more money to the arms manufacturers. So I think this is a clever play versus, going back to Afghanistan, Iraq, trying to support Taiwan. I just think the military-industrial complex, they had to cut some budget lines. And so keeping the next war on this side of the hemisphere means less shipping costs and more costs for bombs.
Well, I guess it is a smarter forever war than the ones that we've been fighting in the Middle East. I don't know if that's the winning pitch exactly, but it does seem, I mean, look, in terms of like what the real motivation is here, I really don't know. I mean, I know this has been a pet project of Marco Rubio's for quite a while. He's been kind of the leading Venezuela hawk in Washington, D.C. for years. And of course, Donald Trump has given him pretty extraordinary power. This was one of his worst appointments. Although there's been several, but it's up there. But he's not, Marco Rubio, I believe to this day, is still acting as the national security advisor as well. He's basically had that role since Waltz was fired. But he's the Secretary of State and the national security advisor for most of this last year. And obviously Venezuela is a resource-rich country, and so perhaps there is that. I'd imagine this is what they've sold Donald Trump on, that they can overthrow this regime and get a regime that'll be friendly to big business here, and that'll somehow help be in America's interest. But of course, even in order to believe that, well, number one, just on the logistics of, like, if you were like, oh, this is going to work out well for America, you'd have to unlearn every lesson that we should have learned over the last 25 years and really over the last 60 years of American foreign policy, that actually things are complicated, and the idea that you just account for one factor and think this is just like some chessboard where you move this piece out and put a new piece in ignores, I don't know, the realities on the ground of every theater of war for the American empire over the last 50 years, and that things are much more complicated than that, and that it's not easy to predict what the reaction's going to be, and that quite possibly a more radical, violent regime could replace this one, or whatever. You know, we could get bogged down in a quagmire. We could, like, just no concern for the possible costs of the thing. And then, of course, that's only, you only even get to that point if you remove the obvious, which is just like how inexcusable it is to even think about launching a war over what? That maybe a new regime would do business with our regime? Because it damn sure ain't about this drug stuff, Rob.
This is really the whole point. We lived through Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, countries we were told would be simple, fast, humanitarian, and strategic. And every time the reality is decades of aftermath. So Dave says it's inexcusable to even flirt with a conflict like this. He's not exaggerating. It's a pattern. Simple moral pretext on the front end, massive consequences on the back end. And ordinary people, not the decision makers, are the ones who pays for the mistakes.
Like, that is just not what is motivating any of this. And so the idea that you would ever, I mean, it's, you know, there's so much, whenever, as I've done, you know, quite a bit of arguing with war hawks. I've done more than most people's, you know, fair share for their entire life in the last year of arguing with war hawks. And one of the things you'll notice, Rob, is that every time, there's a war that they're supporting, they always play on some moral cause. That's always how they sell the thing. You know, even if it's like this, like, it's like, oh, they're drug trafficking, like, it's like the moral cause. It's like, well, think about the people who are dying, or, you know, OD deaths in America, how many families are torn apart by drugs or whatever. Obviously, you know, in the war in Ukraine, they would play on, you know, democracy and, you know, Ghost of Kiev stuff and taking a stand against the next Adolf Hitler or whatever. With Israel, they would use October 7th, you know, but okay.
All right, I'm going to leave it there. Whether you agree with Dave or not, the bigger question is simple. Should any administration be able to drag the country towards a new war without a real debate, without public support? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Keep it respectful, keep it thoughtful. If you like this format where we slow things down and actually unpack the arguments, hit that like, subscribe to the Unfiltered Take,